They dazzled us on screen. Flawless faces, elegant gowns, perfectly combed hair. Golden Age Hollywood sold us a fantasy of glamour and grace. But behind the velvet curtain, the truth downright stinks. Some of the most iconic stars, the ones we grew up idolizing, were hiding some seriously disturbing hygiene habits. We're talking weeks without bathing, breath that could knock out a co-star, and secrets so filthy, even the studio couldn't scrub them clean. And real quick, before we dive in, here's something wild. Out of 100% of people who watch these videos, only 0.2% are subscribed. That means 99.8% watch without hitting that subscribe button. If you're one of the people enjoying these deep dives, help this channel grow so we can keep digging up the stories Hollywood tried to bury. Your support means we can keep going bigger, bolder, and way messier. So before you queue up your favorite black and white classic, let's take a whiff of the real old Hollywood. Here are 15 stars whose personal hygiene was worse than you ever imagined. Counting down to the absolute worst. Number 15. Talula Bankhead, the slush queen of squalor. Talula Bankhead didn't just break the Hollywood mold, she smashed it, lit it on fire, and laughed in its face. Known for her booming voice, wild parties, and complete lack of filter, Bankhead was the walking definition of chaos. And she wore that badge proudly. But along with her theatrical antics came something a little less glamorous, a legendary disregard for bathing. Multiple co-stars and stagehands recalled that Bankhead could go days, sometimes weeks, without so much as touching soap and water. And she didn't care who knew it. She even joked that bathing dried out her skin and ruined her acting. Her solution? Heavy perfume, cigarettes, and a devil-may-care grin. While other stars worked overtime to maintain an image of elegance, Bankhead leaned into the grime. During her theater runs, she often refused to wash at all, claiming the buildup of sweat and oil made her performances more raw. Some found it authentic, others found it nauseating. But Bankhead didn't just accept the rumors. She embraced them. Her most famous quote, "I'm as pure as the driven slush." And honestly, she meant every word. Her co-star in Die Die. My darling, Stephanie Powers, later admitted that working closely with Bankhead was a multi-sensory experience. And not in a good way. But Bankhead didn't flinch. For her, hygiene wasn't a priority. The only thing she cared about was stealing the scene. And if you thought Bankhead was bad, just wait until you meet the Hollywood heartthrob whose hygiene took a nosedive after tragedy. Number 14. Montgomery Clift, the star who couldn't look in the mirror. Montgomery Clift was once Hollywood's golden boy, all piercing eyes and smoldering charm. But after a horrific car crash in 1956, the mirror didn't show the same man anymore. And neither did his habits. Clift's face was left permanently scarred, his jaw shattered, and several teeth knocked out. Physically, he survived. Emotionally? Not so much. The trauma took its toll, not just on his acting career, but on his will to care for himself at all. After the accident, friends noticed a slow decline. Clift, once dapper and sharp, began arriving on set disheveled, unshaven, and often unwashed. His clothes looked slept in. His breath, thanks to decaying dental implants and increasing alcohol use, became an issue cast and crew whispered about. But what makes Clift's story truly tragic is that it wasn't laziness or ego that caused his hygiene collapse. It was pain. Emotional and physical. Every forgotten shower, every skipped grooming session was a symptom of deeper wounds that Hollywood simply didn't talk about back then. Yet even at his lowest, those who loved him, like Elizabeth Taylor, stood by him. She reportedly paid for personal assistance just to make sure he ate, bathed, and didn't completely lose himself. Coming up, a Hollywood bombshell whose glam image hid a dirty little secret. Number 13. Rita Hworth, the glamorous goddess with a secret scalp. To millions, Rita Hworth was perfection personified. Her crimson curls, flawless skin, and sultry stare made her one of Hollywood's most iconic bombshells. But what fans didn't see was the itching, flaking, and chronic scalp infections hidden just beneath that glossy red mane. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino, Hworth was a natural brunette with strong Mediterranean features. But Columbia Pictures didn't think that was marketable enough. So studio head Harry Cohn forced her to undergo painful electrolysis treatments to raise her hairline, literally burning away her natural look. The process was excruciating. It also left her scalp permanently damaged. For the rest of her life, Hworth battled a severe form of seborrheic dermatitis, a condition that caused constant irritation, oil buildup, and visible dandruff. To hide it, the studio dyed her hair toxic red using chemicals that only made things worse. Makeup artists who worked with her became experts at emergency scalp cover-ups. They applied skin-colored powders to conceal flakes, styled elaborate updos to hide redness, and frequently paused shooting just to clean up visible shedding between takes. Her condition got so bad, co-star Glenn Ford once told a friend that Rita's hair looked like it was glued on with desperation. But to the camera? Flawless. The cruel irony was this: the very beauty routine that made her a legend was also what made her suffer in silence. Even Orson Welles, her husband at the time, later admitted that Rita was beautiful because she was told to be, and broken because she had to be. Up next, a Hollywood legend who played it cool on screen, but left co-stars gasping for air in real life. Number 12. Humphrey Bogart, the tough guy with breath that could kill. Humphrey Bogart wasn't just a Hollywood star. He was Hollywood. From Casablanca to the Maltese Falcon, his gravelly voice, smirking confidence, and cigarette-dangling swagger defined an era. But behind the camera, there was one thing Bogart couldn't fake: his horrendous breath. Bogart was a chain smoker to the extreme, reportedly going through 3 packs a day. Add to that his love for whiskey, a decaying set of teeth, and nearly non-existent dental hygiene, and you've got a cocktail that could knock over a horse. Co-stars whispered about it, but few dared say anything publicly. Except they didn't have to. The reactions on set said it all. During To Have and Have Not, young Lauren Bacall, who would later become his wife, was one of the only actresses who didn't flinch during kissing scenes. But not every leading lady was so lucky. On the set of Casablanca, Ingrid Bergman allegedly asked director Michael Curtis to limit their close-up takes, especially those involving dialogue. Not because she didn't like Bogart, but because his breath made the scenes unbearable. By the time he shot The African Queen in 1951 with Katharine Hepburn, the combination of African heat, chain smoking, and minimal dental upkeep turned the set into a literal breathing hazard. Hepburn, ever the professional, smiled through it, but she later referred to the shoot as a sweaty, smoky mess, and not just because of the jungle. The worst part? Bogart knew. He reportedly once joked, "I don't need mouthwash. I've got scotch." And for him, that was the end of the conversation. In the end, his legacy is iconic. But to those who worked in close quarters, Bogey's breath was the real film noir villain. Coming up next, a comedy legend whose grimy habits blurred the line between character and reality. Number 11. Charlie Chaplan, the tramp who reeked off camera. Charlie Chaplan was the genius behind The Tramp, the lovable, bowler-hatted misfit who made the world laugh without saying a word. But off camera, some claimed the only thing more memorable than his performance was his smell. The line between Chaplan's on-screen character and his real-life habits often blurred. Yes, the tramp wore shabby clothes and looked like he hadn't bathed in weeks. But according to people who knew him personally, that wasn't always just acting. Chaplan's second wife, Lita Gray, painted a disturbing picture in their bitter divorce proceedings. She claimed his hygiene was so poor during their marriage that she often avoided physical contact altogether. While some accused her of exaggeration, others backed up her claims, particularly when Chaplan was deep in a creative project. Studio staff reported that when he was working on a film, Chaplan would skip bathing for days, wear the same clothes repeatedly, and neglect basic grooming. He became so consumed by his work that personal hygiene simply didn't exist in his routine. Despite his fame, Chaplan rarely indulged in the star treatment. In fact, unless he was heading to a public event or red carpet, he often showed up to set looking disheveled and smelling earthy, as one assistant put it. The irony? He had the money, the fame, and every resource at his fingertips. But Chaplan never cared about looking or smelling like a star. He just wanted to make people laugh. And the fans never knew. On screen, he was adorable. Off screen, maybe not so much. Next up, a Hollywood goddess with violet eyes and a perfume bottle, but not always a bar of soap. Number 10. Elizabeth Taylor, perfume over soap. Elizabeth Taylor was the very definition of Hollywood royalty. With her violet eyes, porcelain skin, and 8 marriages, she captured the world's imagination like few others ever could. But beneath the diamonds and designer gowns, Taylor had a hygiene habit that left some of her co-stars speechless. According to insiders who worked with her during the 1960s, Taylor's relationship with bathing was surprisingly inconsistent. When she was in love, she glowed. When she was depressed, she didn't bathe. Plain and simple. During the turbulent filming of Cleopatra, the famously chaotic epic where she fell in and out of love with Richard Burton, crew members quietly passed around a warning: "Don't get too close." It wasn't that Taylor didn't care about how she looked. In fact, she was obsessed with appearances. But when it came to scent, she had a shortcut. Tons of perfume, powders, and high-end cosmetics. Soap and water, on the other hand, sometimes didn't make the cut. One makeup artist who worked with her for years admitted that when Elizabeth was in a dark, emotional place, particularly during her explosive fights with Burton, she would sometimes go days without showering, using perfume as a substitute. Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who directed her in Suddenly, Last Summer, and Cleopatra, allegedly developed a code. He'd have an assistant prepare a hot bath in her trailer and casually suggest she take a break. Next, a rock and roll icon whose kiss wasn't nearly as sweet as his songs. Number 9. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and rotten breath. Elvis Presley didn't just rule the music charts. He owned the screen, the stage, and the hearts of millions. With his jet-black pompadour, swiveling hips, and silk-voiced charm, he was the very image of cool. But behind those perfectly styled locks and dazzling jumpsuits, something stank. And it wasn't just the jumpsuits after a sweaty Vegas set. Elvis was obsessed with his appearance, especially his hair. He spent hours perfecting it, using a cocktail of waxes, dyes, and pomades to achieve that signature look. But when it came to oral hygiene, let's just say the king didn't exactly reign supreme. By the mid-1960s, insiders began noticing a problem. His breath. Bad. Really bad. The issue wasn't just coffee or cigarettes. It was decaying teeth, a growing addiction to prescription pills, and near-total neglect of dental care. As his dependency on painkillers and tranquilizers grew, brushing his teeth, or even caring about it, became less and less of a priority. Actress Mary Ann Mobley, who co-starred with him in Girl Happy, 1965, later revealed that kissing scenes with Elvis were nothing like the fantasies fans imagined. Behind that charming smile was a stench that made romance purely cinematic. By the time he filmed Paradise Hawaiian Style, co-stars developed tricks to fake romantic chemistry without getting too close. One actress admitted she breathed through her mouth during kissing scenes just to get through them. And yet, fans never suspected a thing. Because on stage, he was still the king. But those who worked with Elvis in his final years remember a man who could no longer keep up with the pristine image the world expected. From his bloated frame to his fading hygiene, his body was telling a story his fans weren't ready to hear. Up next, a beloved musical icon whose smile lit up the screen. But her personal care dimmed as the cameras stopped rolling. Number 8. Judy Garland. When the spotlight faded, so did self-care. Judy Garland was more than a star. She was magic. From The Wizard of Oz to A Star is Born, her voice could bring you to tears, and her eyes could light up a room. But behind that glowing screen presence was a woman crumbling under the weight of addiction, exploitation, and heartbreak. And it showed in ways the public never saw. From her teen years at MGM, Judy was pumped full of diet pills to stay thin and barbiturates to sleep, trapped in a brutal studio-controlled cycle. She was working non-stop, barely eating, barely sleeping, and barely functioning. As the years went on, her hygiene started to slip. Not because she didn't care, but because she simply couldn't cope. Makeup artists on The Wizard of Oz noted that even at just 16, Judy's skin already showed signs of strain. By the 1940s, as her addictions deepened, so did the neglect. She'd arrive on set unwashed, exhausted, clothes wrinkled, breath sour from alcohol and cigarettes. Some days, it took a full team just to make her camera ready. During A Star is Born, her husband and producer Sid Luft assigned a personal assistant with one unofficial job: make sure Judy bathed. And when she did, she was luminous. But on her bad days, even basic grooming became impossible. Co-star Dirk Bogarde, who worked with her in I Could Go On Singing, recalled the heartbreaking contrast. She could be radiant one day, he said, and almost unrecognizable the next. Hair unwashed, makeup smudged, eyes gone flat. And yet when the lights hit her, she transformed. Judy's hygiene issues weren't laziness. They were symptoms of a lifelong battle with mental illness, substance abuse, and a system that used her up and tossed her aside. Her voice was golden, but offstage, she was just trying to survive. Coming up, a rebel without a cause, or a shower. Number 7. James Dean, Rebel Without a Shower. James Dean was the poster boy for brooding cool. With his slick hair, leather jacket, and don't-care attitude, he defined an entire generation of teenage rebellion. But behind that devil-may-care swagger, Dean had another rebellion going. One against soap, laundry, and maybe even deodorant. Those who worked with him said it plainly. James Dean stank. It wasn't that he didn't have access to a shower. He just didn't bother. During the filming of Rebel Without a Cause, director Nicholas Ray reportedly had to pull Dean aside more than once after crew members complained about his body odor and unwashed clothes. Co-star Natalie Wood, who played his love interest, kept her composure on screen. But behind the scenes, she dreaded the close scenes, not because of the acting, but because of the smell. Friends from his early New York days said he developed these habits while living in a crummy apartment with no hot water. Even after making it big in Hollywood, those habits stuck. He'd wear the same red socks for weeks, believing they brought him luck. He had a favorite leather jacket that he refused to wash, claiming the grime added authenticity. Director Elia Kazan, who cast Dean in East of Eden, was no stranger to working with eccentric, anti-establishment actors like Brando, but even he admitted that Dean's hygiene was a problem on set. Dean wasn't just neglecting hygiene, he was making a statement against studio polish, against Hollywood's phony image, against anything that felt fake. And ironically, that gritty realism made him even more magnetic. Girls swooned, guys copied him, and no one saw the socks. But for those who had to stand next to him on set, Dean wasn't just a rebel without a cause. He was a rebel without a shower. Next up, a method acting genius whose dedication went so far, even his stink became part of the performance. Number 6. Marlon Brando. Method acting, method stinking. Marlon Brando wasn't just an actor, he was a revolution. With performances in A Streetcar Named Desire, On the Waterfront, and The Godfather, he shattered the old-school rules of acting and rewrote the playbook. But while Brando mastered the art of raw, emotional realism, he completely abandoned the art of basic hygiene. As Brando aged and his reputation for eccentricity grew, so did his smell. Crew members and co-stars alike described an overpowering body odor that seemed to follow him like a shadow. Thick, sour, and defiant. By the time he was filming Apocalypse Now, the situation had gotten so bad that director Francis Ford Coppola reportedly had to limit close contact scenes and add ventilation on set. Brando had grown heavy, erratic, and according to several people, flat out refused to wear deodorant or bathe regularly. And this wasn't new. Even in his early days, during A Streetcar Named Desire, when Brando was still considered the sexiest man in Hollywood, director Elia Kazan had to repeatedly remind him to shower. Co-star Vivien Leigh, who shared some of the film's most intimate scenes with him, was reportedly disturbed by his intense body odor, especially under the hot lights. The now iconic scene where Stanley screams, "Stella," in a sweat-soaked t-shirt? That wasn't just acting. That was Brando, unfiltered. As he aged, Brando became increasingly reclusive and disinterested in Hollywood's expectations. He saw grooming, like fame, as fake. One assistant said he believed that his odor made him more real, more human. And maybe it did. But for everyone else on set, it was method acting taken to a nose-clenching extreme. Coming up next, a Hollywood heartthrob whose sweaty sword fights were nothing compared to the stench left behind. Number 5. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling star who reeked of rum and sweat. Errol Flynn swung from chandeliers, battled pirates, and charmed women with a single wink. In the 1930s and 40s, he was the dashing face of adventure in films like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood. But off-camera, the man who looked like he'd just stepped out of a cologne ad was, well, a walking biohazard. Flynn was a notorious alcoholic, and it didn't take long for that habit to start affecting more than just his liver. By the late 40s, co-stars and crew members were whispering about the truth. Flynn's body odor was so strong, it could be smelled from across the set. Why? Because he was always sweating out booze. He'd start drinking early in the day, show up on set half sloshed, and by midday, he'd be leaking whiskey through his pores. And it wasn't just sweat. His breath was reportedly so toxic, some leading ladies had to fight back gag reflexes during love scenes. To make matters worse, Flynn had a habit of wearing the same clothes for days, sometimes even sleeping in them. His costumes had to be reinforced with removable panels, so the wardrobe team could clean the sweat-soaked parts without having to rebuild the entire outfit. That was a trick usually reserved for action scenes. But with Flynn, it was needed daily. Co-star Olivia de Havilland, who worked with him on 8 films, was one of the few who could gently nudge him toward a rinse. She'd casually offer him mouthwash from her dressing room, hoping he'd take the hint without offense. Sometimes it worked. Most times he just smiled and shrugged. Flynn may have been the perfect rogue on screen, but behind the scenes he was more rum-soaked scoundrel than silver screen hero. Next, a billionaire who went from sharp suits and starlets to tissue boxes and jars of urine. Number 4. Howard Hughes, the billionaire who bathed in madness. Howard Hughes was once the ultimate Renaissance man, film producer, aviation pioneer, and one of the wealthiest men in America. In the 1930s and 40s, he dated starlets, wore custom-tailored suits, and walked red carpets with effortless charm. But by the end of his life, he wasn't walking anywhere. He was naked, filthy, and locked away in a dark hotel room, surrounded by jars of his own urine. Hughes's descent into madness is well known, but what's often overlooked is just how extreme his hygiene deterioration became. In his early years, Hughes was obsessively clean, but his struggle with obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, slowly twisted that obsession into full-blown fear. He became terrified of germs. And, ironically, that fear led him to live in some of the most unsanitary conditions imaginable. By the 1960s, Hughes refused to bathe. He let his fingernails and toenails grow several inches long, refused haircuts, and wore tissue boxes on his feet instead of shoes. He believed they helped prevent contamination. He stopped brushing his teeth. He stopped changing clothes. And he stopped letting anyone near him unless they followed his elaborate, impossible hygiene rituals, including using a new bar of soap for each finger and towels touched only at the corners. But the most disturbing detail? Hughes reportedly stored his urine in glass jars around his suite, which he rarely left. The same man who once designed the fastest airplanes in the world was now too afraid to flush a toilet. And yet, he still demanded that the women he dated meet unrealistic standards of beauty and cleanliness. If a woman had even a single blemish, he wouldn't touch her. That contradiction, squalor for himself, perfection for others, defined Hughes's tragic final years. From red carpets to reclusion, Howard Hughes didn't just fall from grace. He fell into a world of filth so extreme, it became legend. Coming up, a Hollywood goddess whose sweet, seductive image masked a shockingly sour secret. Number 3. Marilyn Monroe, the dirty bombshell. Marilyn Monroe was the ultimate icon of desire. She was sugar, sex, and stardust, the blonde bombshell that lit up every frame of film she graced. But behind the flawless makeup, breathy voice, and designer dresses was a woman with some shockingly unhygienic habits. According to co-stars and staff who worked with her, Marilyn had a notorious aversion to bathing. She'd often go days without showering, regularly skipped deodorant, and reportedly never wore undergarments, not for style, but because she simply found them uncomfortable and unnecessary. Clark Gable, her co-star in The Misfits, was known for his love of cleanliness, and he found Monroe's hygiene so off-putting, he refused to be alone with her between takes. Author David Brett, in his biography of Gable, wrote that the actor was completely uninterested in Monroe romantically, in large part because her body odor made him physically recoil. And he wasn't alone. Monroe's makeup artist, Whitey Snyder, had to develop a full toolkit just to deal with her unwashed skin. He carried baby wipes, medicated powder, and industrial-strength fragrance, not for touch-ups, but for full-on wipe-downs between scenes. Even the wardrobe team had to work overtime. They frequently replaced or discarded her clothing, as sweat and odor buildup made it impossible to reuse items, especially during summer shoots or long production days. Yet no matter how she smelled off camera, on screen she was magic. Monroe's image was carefully curated by publicists, photographers, and stylists. But behind that sparkle was a woman often too depressed, too tired, or too disoriented to care for herself. The saddest part? Her hygiene issues weren't just about laziness or rebellion. They were symptoms of deeper struggles: loneliness, trauma, addiction, and the crushing weight of being Marilyn Monroe. Next, a queen of the silver screen who obsessed over every detail, except the smell coming from her mouth. Number 2. Joan Crawford, Hollywood's cleanest star with the dirtiest secret. Joan Crawford was obsessed with cleanliness. She scrubbed her hands raw, bleached her furniture white, and demanded spotless perfection in every home she owned. She had her children's bed sheets changed daily, her walls wiped down weekly, and her makeup applied with surgical precision. But there was one thing even Crawford couldn't clean up: her horrific dental hygiene. Behind those famous red lips and porcelain skin was a mouth so ravaged it shocked even her closest makeup artists. And the worst part? Her breath. It was reportedly so foul, co-stars dreaded kissing scenes, and more than one crew member compared the smell to rotting meat and chemical cement. So how did Hollywood's neatest freak end up with a mouth that cleared rooms? It started with a cosmetic obsession. Crawford, like Marlene Dietrich, wanted to create more pronounced cheekbones. To do that, she had molars removed, voluntarily. This caused her teeth to shift, creating unsightly gaps that had to be filled with cement, capped, and filed down repeatedly. Over time, her gums became infected, her teeth decayed under the caps, and her upper lip swelled unnaturally, becoming part of her signature look, but also a source of pain and stench. In her later years, she required multiple dental surgeries and round-the-clock care. But instead of fixing the root issue, her team focused on covering it up with makeup, camera tricks, and wide shots. Privately, those who worked with her tiptoed around the problem, too afraid to mention it to the famously temperamental star. And yet, the contradiction was stunning. Here was a woman who would fire maids for smudged mirrors, but couldn't control the rotting happening just behind her $1,000,000 smile. Joan Crawford was Hollywood, beautiful, relentless, and terrified of losing control. And in the end, it was her obsession with perfection that helped destroy the very thing she valued most, her image. And now, the final reveal. The king of Hollywood himself, adored by millions, but secretly known for a stench that would haunt his legacy. Number 1. Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood with killer breath. Clark Gable wasn't just a star. He was the star. Suave, masculine, and impossibly charming, he ruled the silver screen for decades. When he delivered that legendary line in Gone with the Wind, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," women everywhere swooned. But if they'd ever been close enough to kiss him, they might have fainted for another reason entirely. Because Clark Gable had notoriously horrific breath. By age 32, Gable had almost no natural teeth left. A severe case of periodontitis, gum disease, forced him to have nearly all of his teeth extracted, replaced with primitive dentures that were uncomfortable and ill-fitting. And those dentures? They caused halitosis so bad it became Hollywood legend. His leading ladies, while thrilled to be cast opposite him, privately dreaded the romantic scenes. On the set of It Started in Naples, 1960, Sophia Loren reportedly asked the director to minimize close contact between takes, unable to handle the smell. Marilyn Monroe, who worked with Gable on The Misfits, was said to avoid standing too close to him off-camera, despite her flirtatious public image. And here's the kicker. Gable refused to use mouthwash or mints because he believed they interfered with his acting. To him, the rawness of performance mattered more than the comfort of his co-stars. One crew member from The Misfits recalled that by the 1960s, Gable's breath was so powerful, you could smell it from several feet away. Yet his magnetism was so strong, no one dared confront him. He was the king, after all. It's almost poetic. The man who embodied Hollywood's golden age, the tailored suits, the perfect smile, the effortless charm, also carried with him a secret so foul it could bring tears to the eyes. And not in the romantic way. So, what does this tell us? That behind the glamour and the glitz, these icons were as human and as messy as the rest of us. Maybe even worse. Which of these hygiene horror stories shocked you the most? Drop your answer in the comments, and let us know which old Hollywood star or scandal you want us to expose next. Hit that like button, subscribe for more hidden histories, and remember, sometimes the truth about Hollywood doesn't just stink, it reeks.